You're just not a team player, Alex. Your attitude has become increasingly unprofessional and disruptive. Those words hung in the air of the windowless conference room like poison gas. I felt my cheeks burn as Human Resources Director Vanessa Mitchell slid my performance review across the polished table. 3 pairs of eyes watched me. Vanessa's cold stare, my direct supervisor Marcus's nervous glance, and CEO Jonathan Reynolds' bored indifference. I'd spent 4 years at Summit Healthcare Solutions, 4 years of overtime, missed birthdays, and just this once weekend work. 4 years of watching patients get denied coverage while executives receive bonuses. And this was my reward, a performance review designed to push me out the door. My name is Alex Chun, 34 years old, former compliance specialist at one of the largest healthcare administration companies you've never heard of. Before I go further, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I will read every single one. I wish I could tell you I always planned to expose them, that I'm some kind of corporate whistleblower hero. The truth is messy. 6 months ago, I was still drinking the company Kool-Aid, believing we were just an understaffed team doing our best in a complex industry. That changed on a Tuesday in March. I remember because it was my nephew Elijah's birthday, and I'd promised to leave work early for his party. I was gathering my things when Marcus messaged me. Emergency meeting with Reynolds, mandatory. I texted my sister an apology as I trudged to the executive conference room. I slipped in quietly, taking the last empty chair near the door. They were already deep in discussion. Spreadsheets projected on the wall. The Portland audit is next month, Reynolds was saying, his voice tight. We're looking at potential penalties of 8 figures if they dig into the rural claims processing. Marcus nodded frantically. We've been bypassing the secondary review protocols for almost 2 years in those counties, saving us about 30% on processing costs. But if anyone bothers to check where Vanessa finished bluntly, I froze. Secondary reviews were mandated by state regulations. They ensured patients weren't wrongfully denied coverage due to clerical errors or technicalities. Skipping them was more than corner cutting. It was illegal, potentially fatal for patients awaiting critical care. Can we backdate some reviews? Someone suggested. Create a paper trail. Too risky, Reynolds dismissed. We need to scrub the existing records. Make it look like those claims never existed. I must have made a noise. A gasp maybe, because suddenly all eyes turned to me. Alex, Reynolds smiled thinly. Didn't see you there. This is sensitive executive planning. You understand the need for discretion, right? I nodded mechanically, my mouth dry. As the meeting continued, I realized something critical. They were speaking openly because they assumed I was complicit. How many times had I processed paperwork without questioning the missing reviews? How many patients had suffered because I didn't look closely enough? That night, instead of cake with my nephew, I sat in my car in the empty parking lot, shaking. Not just from what I'd heard, but from the realization that I had been part of it. My phone buzzed with texts from my sister, showing Elijah's disappointed face. Another family moment sacrificed for a company that was actively harming people. I made a decision that night. Not some grand moral stand, just a quiet promise to myself that I wouldn't look away anymore. The next day, I started keeping records. I installed a voice recording app on my phone. Nothing fancy, just something that would capture evidence if needed. I began volunteering for projects that gave me access to the rural claims data. I stayed late, reviewing files, documenting patterns of denied claims without proper review. What I found was worse than I imagined. Cancer treatments delayed until patients were terminal. Children with chronic conditions denied specialist care. Elderly patients forced to choose between medication and food, all because proper reviews would cost the company money. For 2 months, I gathered information quietly. I saved emails, recorded meetings when I could do so legally in our one-party consent state. I documented everything, uploading it all to an encrypted cloud drive only I could access. That's when the atmosphere at work changed. Marcus started excluding me from meetings. Assignments were rerouted. Coworkers who used to chat with me at lunch suddenly found reasons to eat at their desks. I found out why when Jake from accounting texted me after work. They're building a case against you. Heard Vanessa and Marcus talking. They know you've been accessing files outside your immediate responsibilities. My stomach dropped. They hadn't figured out I was documenting their fraud, but they'd noticed my unusual activity. And rather than question why, they decided I was the problem to eliminate. The next morning, an email appeared in my inbox. Performance review meeting, Thursday, 2 p.m., 3 days away. They were moving fast. I spent those 3 days preparing. I reviewed state whistleblower protections. I organized my evidence. I spoke with a lawyer friend who specialized in corporate malfeasance. Careful to keep names vague. If what you're describing is accurate, she said gravely, this isn't just an employment issue. It's potentially criminal. But Alex, her voice softened. These companies have resources you don't. They'll try to destroy you. Are you sure? Was I sure? No. I was terrified, but I kept thinking about my father's battle with insurance when he got sick. The denied claims, the hours on the phone, the mounting bills. How many families were going through that because of Summit's policies? Thursday arrived with cold rain that matched my mood. I dressed carefully, professional Navy suit, minimal accessories, hair neatly combed, the kind of forgettable appearance that wouldn't give them anything to criticize. In my bag, my phone with the recording app ready, a small notebook, and a USB drive with backup copies of everything. At 1:55, I walked in a conference room. Vanessa, Marcus, and Reynolds were already seated, a united front across the table. A thick folder lay before Vanessa. My personnel file, no doubt filled with recently documented concerns. Alex, thank you for joining us. Vanessa began as if I had a choice. We've been monitoring your performance over the past quarter, and frankly, we have serious concerns. I nodded, saying nothing. Your attitude has become increasingly problematic, she continued. You've been accessing files outside your purview, asking uncomfortable questions in team meetings, and creating what many colleagues describe as a hostile atmosphere. Marcus jumped in, not meeting my eyes. You used to be such a team player, Alex. What happened? What happened? I wanted to scream. We're denying sick people care to save money. We're breaking the law. People might be dying. But I kept my face neutral. Additionally, Vanessa continued, sliding a document across the table, we've noticed concerning patterns in your time management, extended lunches, arriving late to meetings. These behaviors reflect poorly on your commitment to Summit's values. The document was a written warning, the first formal step toward termination. It cited incidents that were either exaggerated or completely fabricated. At the bottom, a line for my signature, acknowledging my performance deficiencies. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Reynolds finally spoke, checking his watch. He clearly expected this to be quick. Another problematic employee neutralized before the audit. I took a slow breath. I appreciate your candid feedback, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened a recording app. Before I respond to these specific points, I'd like to share something relevant to this discussion. Vanessa's eyebrow arched. This isn't really the appropriate time. It'll only take a moment, I said, pressing play. Reynolds' voice filled the room. We need to scrub the existing records. Make it look like those claims never existed. Marcus, if we're caught altering documentation, that's fraud. Reynolds again. The alternative is guaranteed penalties that will tank our stock before the merger. Do whatever it takes. Those patients already had their claims processed. Not our fault if the paperwork disappears. I looked up from my phone. The color had drained from Marcus's face. Vanessa sat frozen, pen hovering above my performance review. And Reynolds, his expression shifted from confusion to recognition to cold fury in the span of 3 seconds. Turn that off, he hissed. I did, but held up my phone. I have the entire meeting and many others. I also have documentation of 342 claims where required secondary reviews were skipped in the past 18 months. Patients who were denied care they were legally entitled to receive. You recorded private conversations? Vanessa found her voice, trying to regain control. That's grounds for immediate termination. It's completely illegal. Not in this state. I finished for her. One-party consent means I can legally record any conversation I'm part of. And as for accessing files outside my purview, I smiled thinly. That's exactly what this performance review is about, isn't it? You noticed I was looking at the rural claims data. You just didn't realize why. The silence in that room was like nothing I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the presence of something else. Fear. The kind that makes powerful people suddenly remember they're still human. What do you want? Reynolds asked finally, his voice unnaturally quiet. It was the question I'd been asking myself for days. What do I want? Revenge? Money? To burn all down? I began. But the conference room door swung open. Catherine Delaney, the company's chief legal counsel, stepped in. I'd only met her once before during new hire orientation. She was tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of calm authority that commanded a room without effort. I apologize for interrupting, she said smoothly. But Mr. Reynolds, there's an urgent situation requiring your immediate attention. Reynolds stood quickly. Too quickly. We'll need to continue this another time. Actually, Catherine said, I'd like Mr. Chun to join us as well. Her eyes met mine, unreadable but intense. Bring your phone. As I gathered my things, Marcus touched my arm. Alex, wait, he started, but I pulled away. Don't, I said quietly. Just don't. I followed Catherine and Reynolds out of the conference room, down the hallway, toward the executive offices. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't how I planned things. Who had called Catherine? What happened to my carefully rehearsed confrontation? Catherine opened the door to a larger conference room, gesturing for me to enter first. I stepped inside and froze. 3 people I'd never seen before sat at the table alongside Summit's chairman of the board. They wore serious expressions and had notebooks open before them. Mr. Chun, Catherine said, these are representatives from the State Medical Board and Department of Insurance. They've been conducting a confidential investigation into Summit's claims processing procedures for the past 3 months. They would very much like to hear what you have to say. Reynolds' face went from pale to gray. What is this? He demanded. The oldest of the visitors, a woman with silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes, looked up. Mr. Reynolds, please take a seat. We have some questions about rural claims processing that Mr. Chun might be able to help us with. I stood there clutching my phone, suddenly understanding that the game had just changed completely. Whatever I had set in motion was now bigger than a performance review, bigger than my job, bigger than me. Mr. Chun. Catherine gestured to an empty chair. I believe you are about to share some recordings. I lower myself into the chair, my legs suddenly unsteady. The woman with silver-streaked hair slid her business card across the table. Dr. Eleanor Hartley, Chief Investigator, State Medical Board. Mr. Chun, she said, her voice gentler than her appearance suggested, we've been investigating Summit for months based on statistical anomalies in rural claim denials. What we've lacked is concrete, internal evidence of intentional wrongdoing. I glanced at Catherine, confused by her role in this. She nodded slightly, as if giving me permission. I don't understand, I said. You're the company's lawyer. Aren't you supposed to be protecting them? Catherine's smile was tired, but genuine. I'm tasked with protecting Summit Healthcare Solutions as an entity, Mr. Chun. Sometimes that means protecting it from its own leadership. She shot a cold look at Reynolds. When certain patterns came to my attention last month, I had ethical and legal obligations that superseded loyalty to any individual executive. Reynolds' face contorted with rage. You sanctimonious, you've been working against me. Actually, Jonathan, said the older man I recognized as Chairman Thomas Bishop. The board authorized Ms. Delaney's cooperation with this investigation 3 weeks ago. His voice was heavy with disappointment. We just didn't inform you or certain members of your executive team for obvious reasons. The realization that I wasn't alone, that others had seen what was happening and were already acting, sent a wave of emotion through me, so powerful I had to press my palms against the table to steady myself. Mr. Chun, Dr. Hartley prompted, you mentioned recordings. With trembling fingers, I unlocked my phone and pulled up the folder of evidence I'd carefully organized. I have recordings from multiple meetings where executives explicitly discussed bypassing required reviews and altering records before the audit. I also have documentation showing patterns of denied claims that should have received secondary review. One of the other investigators, a younger man with kind eyes, slid a thumb drive across to me. Would you be willing to transfer your files? We can provide formal protection for you as a whistleblower. Effective immediately. As I connected my phone, Reynolds stood abruptly. This is absurd. You can't possibly take the word of a disgruntled employee with an obvious agenda. He was literally in a performance review for substandard work when you arrived. A conveniently timed performance review, Catherine noted dryly, scheduled immediately after he began accessing the rural claims database. Mr. Chun, Dr. Hartley said, ignoring Reynolds' outburst, can you tell us when you first became aware of the issues with claims processing? For the next hour, I walked them through everything. The March meeting, my gradual discovery of the pattern, the specific cases I'd identified. I showed them emails, played recordings, explained the internal codes used to track denied claims. Throughout, Reynolds sat in seething silence while Marcus stared at his hands, occasionally offering quiet confirmation of my statements. When I finished, Dr. Hartley closed her notebook. Mr. Chun, I want to thank you for your courage. What happens next will take time. Investigations like this aren't resolved overnight. But I want you to know that your actions today will likely help hundreds, perhaps thousands of patients receive the care they've been wrongfully denied. Chairman Bishop cleared his throat. Mr. Chun, the board would like to request that you consider staying with Summit during this transition period. We'll need someone intimately familiar with these issues to help address them. He glanced at Reynolds. Obviously, with significant changes to your reporting structure and compensation. I almost laughed. Stay after everything? I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I think my presence would complicate an already difficult situation. What I didn't say, I couldn't imagine walking through those doors every day, facing coworkers who'd watched in silence, sitting in meetings with people who'd tried to destroy me. Dr. Hartley handed me another card. Please call my direct line tomorrow. We'll need formal statements, and there are details about whistleblower protections we should discuss. As the meeting concluded, people began gathering their things. Marcus approached me hesitantly. Alex, I save it, I said, the words sharper than I'd intended. You knew what was happening to those patients, and you chose your bonus over their lives. It wasn't that simple, he protested weakly. It never is, Marcus, I replied, suddenly exhausted. That's how people like you sleep at night. I walked out of Summit's glass headquarters at 5:17 p.m. The security guard's curious gaze following me as I surrendered my badge. The spring air felt impossibly fresh after the recycled oxygen of that conference room. I drove home in a daze, the radio playing songs I couldn't hear over the roar in my head. My apartment felt strange when I entered, unchanged yet fundamentally different, like returning home after a long journey. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag, and stood in my silent living room, waiting for the relief, the triumph, the sense of justice that should accompany this moment. Instead, I felt hollow, empty. I'd done the right thing, yes, but at what cost? My career in healthcare administration was effectively over. No company would hire someone with whistleblower attached to their reputation, regardless of how justified my actions had been. I sank onto my couch and finally let myself cry. Not delicate tears, but ugly, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. I cried for the patients who'd suffered because of Summit's policies. I cried for my own complicity before I'd understood what was happening. I cried for the simple life I'd had just 6 months ago when I'd believed in the system I worked for. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from coworkers who'd already heard rumors. I ignored them all except one from Jake in accounting. Holy shit, Alex. Is it true? Did you take down Reynolds? Call me. I didn't call him. Instead, I ordered takeout. I barely tasted and fell into restless sleep, still wearing my Navy suit. The next day passed in a blur of phone calls. Dr. Hartley explained the whistleblower protections I'd receive. My lawyer friend connected me with a colleague specializing in corporate whistleblower cases who outlined potential scenarios ranging from quiet settlement to years-long court battles. By evening, news of the investigation had leaked to local business publications. My phone exploded with notifications as former colleagues and friends shared links with my name prominently featured. Compliance specialist exposes massive fraud at healthcare giant. There was a perverse satisfaction in watching the story unfold from the outside. Summit stock dropped 15% by market close. The board announced Reynolds' leave of absence, pending internal review. Corporate statements promised full cooperation with authorities and commitment to patient care. 3 days later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Chun, this is Stephen Warren from the Portland Auditing Commission." My breath caught. The auditor's summit had been so desperate to deceive. "We've been briefed on your role in exposing the claims processing irregularities," he continued. "Given your intimate knowledge of Summit systems and your demonstrated ethical compass, we'd like to discuss a potential consulting role during our expanded audit." The offer stunned me. "You want to hire me? With appropriate conflict management protocols in place? Yes, your insights would be invaluable." And he added, "It would be a way to ensure the patients affected by these practices receive proper review and restitution." The next morning, I met Warren at a quiet cafe, far from Summit's offices. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with rectangular glasses and an air of meticulous attention to detail. "What we're proposing," he explained after preliminaries, "is a 6-month contract to assist our team in identifying affected claims and ensuring proper remediation." He named a consulting fee that made me choke on my coffee. "We need someone who understands both the technical aspects and the human cost of what happened." "Why me?" I asked bluntly. "There are people with more experience, more credentials." He studied me for a moment. "Because you saw something wrong and refused to look away, even at significant personal risk. That's remarkably rare, Mr. Chun." I accepted the contract that afternoon. What followed was the most challenging and rewarding work of my career. I helped the auditors navigate Summit's labyrinthine systems, identifying patients whose claims required review. I translated corporate doublespeak into plain language for investigators. I built databases tracking patterns of denial across demographics and geographies. Each case we uncovered represented a real person. Someone who'd been denied care while fighting illness. Someone who'd faced financial ruin because of Summit's fraud. I learned their names, read their appeals, sometimes cried over their letters describing what the denials had cost them. In July, 4 months after that fateful meeting in March, the state announced formal charges against Summit Healthcare Solutions and 3 executives personally: Reynolds, Vanessa, and the CFO. The complaint detailed systematic fraud affecting over 6,000 patients with penalties potentially reaching $100 million. More shocking to me, personally, Marcus had turned state's evidence, providing testimony against his former bosses in exchange for immunity. The man who'd sat silently while they plotted to ruin me had found his voice when saving himself. I watched the press conference announcing the charges from my new home office set up in the spare bedroom of my apartment. My phone rang immediately after. Jake, the only person from Summit I still spoke with regularly. "They're saying Marcus is the hero," he fumed. "He's giving interviews claiming he helped investigators build their case. Can you believe it? After everything you risked." I surprised myself with my answer. "It doesn't matter, Jake. The patients are getting justice. That's what counts." And I meant it. Somewhere during those months of painstaking work, my focus had shifted from vindication to restoration. Justice wasn't about watching Reynolds in handcuffs, though I won't pretend that image didn't bring satisfaction. It was about making things right for the people who'd been harmed. In August, the first letters went out to patients whose denied claims had been identified in the audit. They would receive not just the coverage they'd been entitled to originally, but additional compensation for delays in care and related hardships. For some, it came too late. We found 27 cases where patients had died while waiting for treatment Summit had wrongfully denied. Those 27 names haunted me. I printed their case files and kept them in a folder on my desk, a reminder of the real cost of corporate greed and institutional cowardice, including my own before I'd spoken up. By September, my contract with the auditors was approaching its end. I'd received offers from healthcare advocacy groups, law firms specializing in medical fraud, even a healthcare journalism outlet. My whistleblowing, rather than ending my career, had opened doors I never knew existed. On a warm Friday afternoon, I received an unexpected email invitation. Summit Healthcare Solutions Remediation Reception. October 15th. The note explained that the newly appointed CEO wanted to host a small gathering to thank those who'd helped expose and address the fraud. My name was on the guest list. I almost deleted it immediately. Why would I want to set foot in that building again? But curiosity won out. I RSVP'd yes. The reception was held in the same executive conference room where I'd first heard Reynolds discussing the illegal practices. Walking through Summit's lobby felt surreal. The same security desk, the same elevators, but everything fundamentally changed. The new CEO, Dr. Lydia Moreno, greeted me warmly at the door. Mr. Chun, I can't express how grateful we are for your courage. What you exposed was antithetical to everything healthcare should represent. Inside, about 30 people mingled. State investigators, auditors, board members, and a few Summit employees who'd apparently assisted with the investigation after it became public. I recognized Dr. Hartley, who nodded respectfully from across the room. Chairman Bishop approached me, glass of sparkling water in hand. Mr. Chun, it's good to see you again under better circumstances. Is it better? I asked quietly. 27 people died. His face fell. Yes, a fact none of us can ever make right, he paused. We've established a foundation in their names. It won't bring them back, but it will provide scholarships for students entering healthcare ethics and patient advocacy. I nodded, unsure what to say. Nothing could undo what had happened, but at least there was an attempt at meaningful amends. As I circulated through the room, I noticed Catherine Delaney standing alone near the windows. I made my way to her. I never properly thank you, I said, for what you did that day in the performance review. She smiled slightly. I should be thanking you. Your actions gave me the leverage I needed to convince the board we had a serious problem. I'd been suspicious for months, but lacked concrete evidence. How did you know what was happening in that meeting? I'd wondered this for months. Vanessa came to me first, she admitted. She thought I'd help them build a case for your termination. She mentioned you'd been accessing the rural claims data and had recordings of meetings. That told me everything I needed to know. A server approached with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and as I reached for one, I caught sight of a familiar face across the room. Marcus, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit, was speaking with one of the auditors. My stomach clenched. I hadn't seen him since that day in a conference room. According to Jake, he'd been kept on during the transition in a reduced role. He saw me staring and excused himself from his conversation. I briefly considered walking away, but stood my ground as he approached. Alex, he said, his voice strained. I didn't expect to see you here. Likewise, I replied coolly. I know you must hate me, he continued when I didn't say more. I deserve that, but I want you to know I'm sorry, not just for what happened to you, but for my part in all of it. I should have spoken up sooner. I studied his face, searching for sincerity. Why didn't you? He looked away. Fear, mortgage, kids' college funds. A million little justifications that seemed important until they weren't. He shook his head. I tell myself I eventually did the right thing, but we both know it was only after I had no other choice. There was something broken in his admission, a recognition of his own moral failure that felt more genuine than any polished apology. We all have our moments of cowardice. Marcus, I said finally, what matters is what we do next. As the reception wound down, Dr. Moreno clinked her glass for attention. Before we conclude, I'd like to share some news. Today, we received final approval from the state for our remediation plan. Every affected patient will receive notification next week, and the first compensation payments will be distributed before Thanksgiving. Applause filled the room. I felt unexpected tears prick my eyes. This was it, the real victory. Not my revenge against those who tried to silence me, but healing for those who'd been hurt. Dr. Moreno continued, we've also instituted new compliance systems designed with input from our Ethics Advisory Board, which will include patient advocates and independent medical professionals. She scanned the room, then focused on me. And we're establishing a permanent compliance ombudsman role, someone who reports directly to the board with authority to investigate any concerns without fear of executive interference. She walked toward me. Mr. Chun, we would be honored if you would consider taking this position. No one understands better than you what happens when these systems fail and what it takes to fix them. The room went quiet. Everyone watched, waiting for my response. 6 months ago, I would have laughed at the idea of returning to Summit in any capacity. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully. I need to understand the parameters of the role before I could consider it. Dr. Moreno nodded. Of course, no pressure, just an open door when you're ready to discuss it. As the reception ended, I found myself standing once more in Summit's lobby, waiting for the elevator. Dr. Hartley joined me, putting on her coat. Quite a journey, Mr. Chun, she remarked. From being called unprofessional in a performance review to being offered a C-suite position with board access. I smiled faintly. Not the revenge I imagined when I walked into that performance review. Isn't it, though? She asked, her eyes knowing. The company that tried to destroy you is now begging for your help to rebuild its integrity. The executives who threatened you are facing charges, and most importantly, thousands of patients will receive the care they deserve. The elevator arrived, and she stepped inside. Sounds like the best kind of revenge to me. The kind that heals instead of hurts. As I walked to my car, I realized she was right. My victory wasn't in watching Reynolds' downfall or in the professional opportunities that had come my way. It was in knowing that I'd faced a moment of moral challenge and chosen courage over comfort. That when it mattered most, I had done what was right instead of what was easy. I still keep those 27 names on my desk, not as a trophy of my whistleblowing, but as a reminder that systems fail when good people stay silent, that the cost of looking away is measured in human lives, and that sometimes the most powerful act of revenge against a corrupt system is simply telling the truth, no matter the personal cost. Have you ever stood at that edge, where your heart screamed to speak, but fear chained your lips shut? Where silence felt safer, but your soul whispered, "This isn't right"? I've been there, and maybe so have you. If you had to face that moment again today, would you make a different choice? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one because your voice matters here. And if this moment spoke to something inside you, hit subscribe. Every week, I open up a little more, sharing real truths from my life. No filters, just honesty. Let's grow through it all together.